We're doing Parashat Tisa. Even though there are many important points in this week's Parasha, I'll try to cover the most important ones, the most important lessons. After all, that's what the series is all about, is absorbing the important lessons in each week's Parasha. And the most important episode in Jewish history and in this week's Parasha is Maaseh Egel. So we'll begin with that, with the golden calf. What exactly went on? What happened? How did it happen? This is a very serious tragedy. Unfortunately, it is more serious than anything else in Jewish history. Even though we're very saddened by the destruction of the first and the second Beit HaMikdash, what is so serious about Maaseh Egel, the golden calf, is that first of all, it is so close to Matan Torah and Har Sinai. We were just fresh out of Egypt. We just graduated. We said Na'aseh v'nishma. We were so elevated. We had so much clarity. We're on a very, very high level. And to do something like this is not normal. And it contradicts everything that we agreed to. It's like we broke a contract. And worse than that, it took us down very quickly from the highest levels to the lowest levels. In just a few moments, we came down from where we were. So this is a very serious event. And even though you may have read many commentaries about it, many explanations, what I'm going to try to do right now is talk a little bit more about subconsciously what was going on in their mind. How did they come to that? Sometimes we do things, we don't realize why we do them. Subconsciously, there's something going on in our mind that makes us do these things. We're still guilty, we're still responsible, but nevertheless, it is something perhaps deeper than what appears to be on the surface. So in order to understand this event, we need to understand a little bit about what Avodah Zarah is. What is idol worshipping, and how did it begin with? Where does it come from? In the very, very beginning, the way Avodah Zarah came about was through a mistake. Obviously, everybody was aware in the very beginning that Hashem created the world. Hashem supervises the world. There's nothing else. So how does Avodah Zarah begin? All of a sudden to believe in other gods, Halila, in other forces? There was a mistake. How did this mistake come about? So the Rambam explains that in the very beginning, the early civilizations began to worship the stars, thinking that since they are servants of God, after all, He created them for a purpose, then we need to give credit, or we need to worship and respect His servants just like we respect Him. Eventually what happened, however, is that they forgot about the master and only remembered the servants. And that is how they drifted from believing in one God, from being monotheistic, to believing in many gods, which in fact are not gods, obviously, they're servants. So in the beginning, all it was a mistake. Later on, however, including today, especially in India, what they believe is no longer based on a mistake. All they have is minhag avoteim biyadam. All they have is their forefathers' traditions. So all the rituals that you may see today, that you may have heard of, read about, that because that is several thousand years, all it is minhag avoteim biyadam. It is their tradition of their forefathers, of their ancestors. That's what they're following. They're not changing, they're not making a new religion. However, our greatest wonder, and what we're puzzled about, is not about these individuals who began with a mistake and whose children or future generations are following a tradition. Our greatest wonder is with those who are aware of the truth, who know it. We're clear about that. Nevertheless, they somehow want to deny it. Who are we talking about? We're talking about the Jewish people at this time of Maaseh Egel, and we're talking about scientists too. Scientists are very intelligent people. They should be the first ones to admit, to recognize, as some of the honest ones did, that there is a God who created this world. There's no such thing as a Big Bang. There's no such thing as evolution. That there must be a great architect, an engineer who put this beautiful masterpiece together. It's just common sense. It's logic. So a scientist who hopefully, if he would be logical, smart, and honest, should be able to reach this conclusion if he wasn't taught that by his father or by his teachers. So our greatest puzzle is with scientists and with Am Yisrael who know the truth, not with those who are living in error because of an old tradition. So in order to understand this behavior of these individuals who know the truth but nevertheless want to deny it and believe in Avodah Zarah, we have to ask ourselves another question. Why should there be a mistake to begin with? We just said that the earlier generations made a mistake and eventually they drifted. Why should they ever make a mistake? And for that we need to go back to the very first time that man rebels against his Creator. Who was that? Adam HaRishon. How? He was tempted by the Nachash, right, by the serpent, to go against Hashem's instructions. Without getting too deep into that episode of what went on there, which in itself is amazing, perhaps we can just point out one thing. What the Nachash is trying to achieve, I mean, after all, what benefit does he get from this, is as follows. You are a human being. You're not an animal. You're endowed with intelligence, with sechel. What do they eat from? Etz hada'at. Intelligence. All we're talking about right now is intelligence. There's an emphasis there on using your mind, on becoming knowledgeable. For what purpose? So you can make decisions on your own. So you don't have to be as dependent as you are right now on God. Become independent. Use your mind. And in doing so, you will become less dependent on God. That is the emphasis of the Nachash. Use your mind. Make your own decision. In Maaseh HaEgel, in the doing of the Egel, subconsciously at least, there is a sheifa. There is a certain aspiration here of wanting to have new direction. As you may see sometimes in many apartment buildings or many stores, under new management. Moshe Rabbeinu is not here. So they're putting up a big sign. Right now we're under new management. Subconsciously, they're looking for direction. They're looking for a change in direction because the old direction is no longer there. And they want to change. They want to change. But what is driving that change? What is really, pushing? Why can't they just wait? They were told Moshe is coming back. So we're going to see what the Midrash has to say about that. But before we see the Midrash, what's driving them deep down, the root behind this desire to make a change, to have a new management, the rabbis tell us it's called hefkerut or metiranut. In English, that is translated as permissiveness. Wanting to unburden any limitations. That everything should be mutar. That everything should be okay. Because right now they're limited. They have been following, or they need to follow certain mitzvot, certain mishpatim, which are very rigid, without too much flexibility. Subconsciously, the human mind wants to be mufkar, hefkerut. That's the kind of life he would really like to live, had he had no restrictions. So that is what's driving them, to have no limitations, to have no responsibilities. And therefore, the rabbis tell us, what happens when somebody is Oved Avodah Zarah, and he knows the truth. We'll talk about somebody that is not making a mistake or has a tradition, but he knows the truth. Why is he really doing it? All it is a front. Don't think he really believes in this and doesn't believe in that. Don't think that he's a true atheist, that he needs to be yet convinced that there is a God. No. Avodah Zarah is in fact a front. A front to what? To his deep desires. Of what? Of wanting to live a life of permissiveness. That everything should be okay. Everything should be mutar. I'm not saying this. The students of Darwin himself said it. That the reason why they espoused the theory of evolution is not because they truly believed that man came from a monkey, but because they wanted to allow themselves to live a life of permissiveness. They didn't want to have any limitations, that they can have as much znut, prostitution, as their heart desires, without having to have a guilty conscience that they're doing something wrong. Those are approximately their words. That this was not a theory that they truly believed in. It was just a front to cover up their subconscious desires, their deep desires of wanting to live a life without having any restrictions. Yes?
In that context, why you see so many Israelis that go to India and they worship these Indian gods, and they don't really want that.
No, that is something totally different. Israelis going to the Himalayas and meditating and so forth, they're searching for the truth. They are realizing that there's something more to life than serving in the Israeli army and working, hard for a living and having to do battles with the Palestinians. Why? What's all this for? They're trying to discover themselves, to discover, what is life all about. So they're going in the wrong direction. Instead of going to their traditions, instead of trying to discover their roots, they're going through the back door. And eventually, hopefully, many of them come back. So that has nothing to do with Avodah Zarah. That has to do with the neshama of a Jew that has a holy spark that is searching for the truth. That is actually a good thing that they're doing. They're realizing there's something more to life. Oh, to the few that get stuck in the cults, yeah, we'll talk about that. Obviously, the power of the Yetzer Hara is very, very strong. We'll talk about that. But anyway, this is what is happening for the most part with those who know the truth but want to escape it, want to deny it, Not because they believe really in something else, but they're using this as a front to cover up what their real desires are. But the bigger question is, how could the mind is something very powerful, how could the mind allow such a corrupt way of thinking? How could you justify how could the mind allow something like this to happen? The mind knows, the head, right, is thinking, right? This individual knows the truth. How could he fool himself? People fool others, but how could you fool yourself? And the answer is very simple. Take a look as an example to one who's a heavy smoker. The doctor shows him pictures of his lungs, how much damage has happened. And he asks him, listen, you want to live or you want to die? If you continue with your habit, you're going to die. You don't care about your family. You don't care about yourself. I'd like to ask some of you, if you know anybody who's been smoking, what would he answer? No, I think some of them know that it's going to happen. They've seen their friends die. What would somebody say? Right, some will say, well, others have smoked and they've lived to a nice ripe age of 85. Some people exactly will say, I don't care. Right. Now, why would somebody say he doesn't care? After all, he does love his family. Why doesn't he want to give up his habit? Yeah, but what's addiction mean? It's called immediate gratification. Yeah, but it's not just a type of it. This ta'ava, this desire, brings about immediate gratification. Now, how does the Yetzer Hara work? This is a very important point. How does the Yetzer Hara convince the Jew to rebel against the Almighty? The Almighty promised you all this great reward in Olam Haba for observing the mitzvot, for being careful and not committing any transgressions. So how does the Yetzer Hara ever overpower Hashem Khalila? How does he convince you otherwise? We have, Baruch Hashem, a sound mind. Very simple. The Yetzer Hara says, you know what? I give you immediate gratification, cash. Hashem gives you check dahui, post-dated check. What would you prefer? Cash or post-dated check? That's how the Yetzer Hara works. You get immediate gratification. I know what I like. I see what I enjoy. I have it now. He can't think about the future. The mind, therefore, is numb. Does not see what the end will be. He knows what he sees now and what he feels now. That's how the Yetzer Hara usually, or many times unfortunately, can win the battle. By convincing the mind, hey, you're enjoying it now. This is a post-dated check you're going to get later. Alright, what we still need to understand is, okay, this makes some sense for those who were never true believers. They did not grow up in a Jewish home perhaps. They never had a very, very strong emunah. They had doubts. But how do we explain someone who is a true believer? He grew up as a true believer. He was a tzaddik once upon a time. And he went off the derech. And all of a sudden, he stops believing. He lets go of his good ways. He lets go of his tradition. His emunah weakens. He falters. How do we explain his behavior? If someone has doubts, misgivings, he has ta'avot, we can predict more or less what will happen to him. But if somebody was leading a good life, how could it happen to him? And you'll understand why I'm asking this question, because we're trying to figure out Am Yisrael, who was more or less behaving themselves for a while, just received the Torah, and all of a sudden, they drop everything. But before we go on, I need to make a small correction. When I say Am Yisrael, I don't really mean all of the Jewish nation. After all, who was to blame for the Egel? The Erev Rav. The Erev Rav were the multitudes of non-Jews who joined us when we left Egypt. The Jews are leaving? Let's be Jewish. Right? They wanted to escape Egypt. So they are the ones who are instigating this whole thing. They are behind all of this. Why is Am Yisrael to blame at all then? Because they didn't get up and say no. If you have a chance to stop someone, or even to rebuke, and you do not do so, then you are to blame just as much. Because perhaps, had you said something, you would have stopped him. Not only did you not stop him, perhaps now he's going to influence you.
Hur tried.
Yeah, Hur is something else. Hur did try. But many of Am Yisrael could have done the same as Hur did. And they would have been a lot more influential, a lot more powerful than one individual. So anyway, all of Am Yisrael has to carry now this burden of having participated in Maaseh HaEgel. Except for Shevet Levi, right? So how does it happen that someone is a believer and he lets go? How does his emunah ever weaken? The way it begins is through something called Poseach al Shtei HaSeifim. When somebody becomes not religious, and he was once upon a time religious, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a couple years until he lets go everything. First, he removes his kippah. because he doesn't want to be too Jewish. He's ashamed, or whatever, he has some difficulties finding a job. After removing his kippah, well, he's about to eat lunch. Well, I can't make a blessing if I don't have my kippah. So he stops making blessings on the food that he eats. Since I'm not making a blessing, then why should I wash my hands? Right? His Yetzer Hara is telling him, well, you don't really have to wash your hands. There are some very righteous Jews that say, well, you know what? To wash my hands, I have to go down the block. I'll just put the bread in a sandwich bag, because in the halakha it is written that if you have something between your hands and the bread, you don't have to wash your hands if it's too hard to get hold of some water. In other words, so he may try this excuse and eventually drop that too. Eventually, what happens after that? Well, he's invited to lunch by his non-Jewish workers. He says, well, you're Jewish, so we'll take you out to a fish restaurant. Right? Chaz v'shalom, you're not going to eat tarif. You're going to eat fish. And you're going to make sure that it's not catfish, of course. That it's a kosher fish. But where was it fried? It was the same frying pan as the shrimp and the lobster. And it was cut with the same knife that they used to cut the oysters, or whatever, right? What about that? Did you check the salad? Maybe it has tola'im, maybe it has worms. But anyway, he's becoming more and more lenient. After all, he's not eating pork. What happens after that? Well, you can start imagining, after he doesn't care about eating in a non-Jewish restaurant, perhaps he actually allows himself to eat non-kosher food. After all, he says, I'm in Oklahoma City now for a business transaction there, and there's no kosher restaurant in the area. So he says, Pikuach nefesh. It's an emergency. I have to eat. What emergency? Go have a granola bar. Go have some potato chips. Some Hershey chocolate. I mean, you can find that anywhere in this country. Right? But the Yetzer Hara is telling him, no, but I have to have a good solid meal. Anyway, eventually, he drops everything, including Shabbat, including the holidays, and eventually after that, his children intermarry. So this does not happen overnight. The very first step, the very first stage of weakening of Emunah is called Posech al Shtei HaSeifim. In English, that's called wanting to have the cake whole and eat it too. In other words, they want to be Jewish, but they want to allow themselves certain things that are against the Torah. They want to try to dance on both weddings at the same time. And that's not possible, we know. Elyahu Navi was criticizing Am Yisrael during the time that he lived about this behavior. Until when will you divide yourself between these two opposite ways? If God is God, then go with Him. If this idols are God, then go with Him. You can't have both. Decide, make up your mind, which one do you want? In the very beginning, a Jew does not want to let go. He knows the truth. How could he do it? But he wants to have this world too. He has to have Domino's pizza. They say it's the best pizza. I don't know if it is, right? But how could he do it? So he goes to pray every day, but he allows himself to eat something not kosher once in a while. After all, he says it's just cheese, it's not pork. So what? It's not kosher cheese. Yeah? The Yetzer Hara justifies everything in his mind, but he's still very Jewish. He's posech al shtei seifim. He wants to have it both ways. But that won't last too long. When we talk about having it both ways, does any group come to your mind in Jewish history that wanted it to have both ways? They wanted to remain Jewish? The Reform movement. How did it begin? It did not begin by dropping everything. They were Jewish in the very beginning, right? They were very Jewish. But they had some concerns. They wanted to have equal rights. They wanted to be the same like the Germans. They didn't want to be outcasts. They didn't want to be second-class citizens. They wanted to prevent anti-Semitism. They were very concerned about how the non-Jews looked at them. So they wanted to integrate themselves a little bit better into German society by removing some of the Jewish symbols, like the kippah, like wearing German clothing, going to their colleges. And what was their ta'ana? What did they say that justify this? We have to remove the barriers. We have to eliminate anti-Semitism. And why is that not a good ta'ana? It's silly. Because if there is anti-Semitism, does that mean that you should change the Torah? Or that you should examine yourself why the Goyim hate you? If the Goyim hate you, if they're after you, it's because something that you are doing is not right. It's nothing wrong with the Torah. The Torah was always good, will always be the same, it cannot be changed. Why are you rushing to change the Torah instead of changing yourself? Examine yourself first. But they use that as an excuse. For what? As a front to cover up what really was bothering them. that they were not proud to be Jewish. Deep down, many of them were not proud. They wanted to be integrated. They wanted to be Germans. They said, Berlin is Yerushalayim. So they did not say that up front and in the very beginning. They were using all these excuses. We need to be more integrated. But we knew, the rabbis knew back then, that all of this was a farce. It was not true. It was a cover-up. And little by little, this movement abandoned Judaism altogether. Today, they don't believe that there is a God that created the world. The Torah is not divine. It was written by a committee. Things have become worse. They have become weaker and weaker. And many of them have completely assimilated, and the children and grandchildren have intermarried. Let's go back to Maaseh HaEgel now. So they made a mistake, even though it's not a real mistake. It was what subconsciously they wanted. What's the big deal about it? The big deal about it is not so much because they had desires, the Erev Rav. That's not such a big deal. Everyone has desires. The biggest problem, which is pointed out in this week's Parashat, is something else. It's called Am Kshe Orevhu. They have just committed a tremendous sin, but you know what the problem with that sin is? Let's not talk about the idol worshipping right now. Okay, Asulaim Egel Masecha. Let's not talk about the Metiranut, the Efkerut, that they want to live a life without any restrictions. You know what the biggest problem is? Am Kshe Orevhu, they're a stubborn nation. That is emphasized more than anything else. Why should that be emphasized? Because that is a very serious problem. If someone is stubborn, he will have a hard time doing teshuvah. Let's say somebody makes a mistake. Let's say he succumbed to his yetzer. It can happen to any one of us. We're all human. We have our weaknesses. So we succumbed. What's a good example of somebody succumbing to his yetzer? I'll give you a good example. Let's say you just had steak for dinner, and an hour later your friend comes and tells you, you got to taste this Godiva chocolate. It just received the good ashgaha. Well, wait a minute. I still have a few more hours to go. But because you're so tempted, you're not going to wait a full 6 hours. You succumb to your yetzer. Wait a few more hours. Save the chocolate for tomorrow. What's the big deal? But some people can't wait. This can happen to anyone. To succumb to something which you say, what's the big deal? 6 hours. It's anyway a rabbinic decree. It's not written in the Torah. You see how the yetzer works? It's not the end of the world. What will happen to me? It's not unhealthy to have it, right? The yetzer works in all sorts of ways to convince us that this is okay. And you succumb. What's the problem? The problem is not succumbing. The problem is teshuvah. If one is stubborn, one will not acknowledge his mistakes. He will not admit that what he did was wrong. And that is a bigger problem. One makes a mistake, one succumbs to his yetzer once in a while. Okay, be careful that doesn't happen next time to you, that you don't repeat your mistake. But one who is stubborn, this nation is a stubborn nation. How will they ever correct their mistakes? How will they ever admit to their wrongs? And the prophets had many, many problems with the Jewish nation. They would rebuke them, they would yell at them, and many of them were mamash endangering their lives by rebuking, by telling them off. They didn't listen because they were stubborn. That's the biggest problem. Yes.
That's also good, Rabbi. It's good.
Obviously, stubbornness is good if you're being persecuted and you resist the pressure and you don't give in. Yeah. But here we're talking about a negative form of stubbornness. One who does not admit his faults, his mistakes, he will have a difficult time doing teshuvah. Before we go on, how do we deal with stubbornness? What's a quick fix? Obviously, everybody has to work on himself and control himself. But what's a quick fix for stubbornness? So I believe in the Sefer Chovat HaLevavot, he brings down as follows. If someone does you a favor, your friend, don't you feel obligated to him? You thank him, right? If a Jew were to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu regularly for everything that he has done for him, he would feel obligated to Hashem for all that he has done for him. When one feels obligated, azunichna, he humbles himself. Humbling oneself is a cure for stubbornness. Obviously, you can't tell someone, just be humble. That's what the Sefer Chovat HaLevavot says. It's very important for one to get into the habit of continuously thanking Hashem. The rabbis put it into the Sidur. From the moment we wake up, we say, Modani lefanecha, that you gave us back our neshama, that we have our life. Baruch Hashem, we're thankful for everything. We come out of the restroom, we're thankful for that. Some people have a problem with that. Right? So you have to be thankful, you have to be grateful for everything. If one acknowledges all the good that Hashem does with him, it will soften his heart, it will humble him, and he will not be as stubborn, because he will feel he's obligated. So what happens after the Maaseh HaEgel? Moshe does the opposite of what someone who's stubborn would do. Somebody who's stubborn denies. Who does that remind you? Who denied at the very beginning that he did anything wrong? Adam HaRishon. Adam HaRishon is the first example of rebelling against Hashem's instructions. And instead of doing teshuvah, instead of saying, I'm sorry, he says, no, he made me do it, she made me do it. Admit it, that you made a mistake. Moshe does. Very interesting, because if you read the pasuk, you could think that he's accusing Am Yisrael, instead of pleading for them. He says, Ana chata'a mazeh chata'a gedolah. Please forgive them, this nation has committed a terrible sin. You're trying to plead for them? You're accusing them? It sounds like he's accusing them, but he's not. The commentaries explain that he's actually trying to admit their mistake for a very important reason. The rabbis tell us that whoever commits a sin, umiyad lahar miken mitcharet, and he immediately regrets it on the spot, eno zaz misham ad shemochalim lo. They will forgive him almost immediately. It does not say mechaprim lo, kapara he may not have. You may need Yom Kippurim to atone. But mochalim lo. What does mochalim lo mean? They forgive him. What does forgiveness really mean? It's not an atonement. The sin still has made a stain on the neshama. It requires kapara. But what does forgiveness mean? Hashem says, I will not allow the accuser, in other words, the accusing angel, to go after you, for you to pay this debt. Since you immediately regretted it, you have killed the accusation against you. One, therefore, who makes a mistake, commits a sin, and does not admit it, does not immediately begin to take steps to correct it, that is where the accusation against him begins to work. All right, you made a mistake. You succumbed to your yetzer, but at least fix it. Correct it. You don't want to do anything about it? That means you're happy. You're proud of it. You don't care. That's where the problem begins. The problem is when one does not want to correct his errors. So Moshe immediately, as soon as he sees them with this egel, immediately confesses, admits that they just committed a grave sin, to be menvatel de kitru, to do away with the accusation. The Baal Shem Tov says something else. The Baal Shem Tov says, imagine a child who's very mischievous. And mischievous children sometimes break things in the house. And this mischievous child just broke something, did something terrible in the house, but in the process of doing so, he broke his back. Father comes home and sees this, and he has two choices. To give the child a spank, to rebuke him, or, if he realizes how seriously his child is injured, is to rush him to the hospital. This is not a time, Moshe says to Hashem, to spank them, to rebuke them. This is sick. Am Yisrael is sick. This is a normal people. This is not somebody who has a problem. This is a normal, healthy people who just recently received the Torah, who heard your voice, and if they were able to commit this grave sin so quickly, they're sick. There's something wrong with them. They need a refuah shelema. Don't do anything against them. Who do you punish? A criminal who knows what he's doing, right? He's always a criminal. Knowingly he steals. But this is a good, healthy nation. There's nothing wrong with them. Or there was nothing wrong with them before. If they committed this terrible sin, obviously there must be something wrong now. They must be sick. They need help. This is not a time to rebuke. So the Baal Shem Tov explains that is the idea of what Moshe says. Ana chata'a mazeh chata'a gedolah. They committed this great chet, something which is abnormal after receiving the Torah so recently. It must be that they're sick. They need help, if anything, not a rebuke and not a punishment. This is a very important point in our daily lives as well. If somebody insults you, if somebody does something against you, you may become very upset. You may get angry and yell at them. You may even Khalila curse them. But before you do so, think for a moment. Is this person a normal person? Does he always curse? Does he always offend you? Does he always insult you? Or he is a perfectly normal human being. You are in good terms with him. And perhaps now he had a bad day. Perhaps now he or she is nervous. And what he or she is telling you, they don't really deep down mean it. They're just saying it because they had a nervous breakdown or who knows what. Right? This is not someone that you can accuse. It just could be that there's something happened. So control yourself. Find out why they said what they said, why they did what they did, instead of immediately accusing them and going after them. We've covered a little bit of the ideas of what went on in Maaseh Egel, but we still have to include the simple Peshat. The simple Peshat, the simple interpretation of what went on there. The simple explanation. And what is that? So the Midrash tells us that Am Yisrael was shown the body of Moshe Rabbeinu, that he had died. And they thought for a moment that that is what happened, that he's not coming back. And they immediately went to search for new leadership. They did not deny the existence of God. All they wanted is for the koach eloki, this spiritual power that led them out of Egypt, to enter something concrete, something physical here in this world that they can relate to. They were not on the level of Moshe of being able to relate to Hashem. And that is what they asked for. Initially, not all of Am Yisrael realized what would happen, because the fact that a golden calf emerged was Maaseh Kishuf, was through a combination of witchcraft and Maaseh Satan Sheitzliach. In other words, that the Satan succeeded in this plan of his to mislead Am Yisrael by showing them that Moshe passed away. In fact, that was not true. So the reality here is that they didn't intend to worship idols. They didn't Halila deny the existence of God. They just saw all the miracles, and they know who took him. They knew who took him out of Egypt. It was just a way of identifying with this koach, being able to relate to this power that took him out of Egypt, and having it close to them in some form. That is what happened on the Pashut Pshat level. In other words, if we try to explain it simply. But obviously, this is not something so simple. It's not so simple because otherwise Hashem would not have been so upset. If you follow the words of Hashem carefully, you will see that Hashem is very, very upset. Why? Hashem knows the truth. Hashem knows that this was a Maaseh Satan, that this was the Erev Rav, that they on their own do not deny his existence. So why is Hashem so upset? So if you look, there's some key words in this week's Parashat that basically tell you the whole picture of why Avodah Zarah is so serious and why Hashem is so upset. The words are Saru Maher Min HaDerech. They moved away quickly from the derech that they had been given in Har Sinai. They moved away quickly. What did we say earlier on? That a Jew usually does not weaken overnight, does not weaken quickly, does not move away from Judaism just like that. It takes perhaps many years until he drops everything. What happened here with Avodah Zarah? Saru Maher. They moved away quickly, instantaneously. And what happens with Avodah Zarah? Avodah Zarah has a tremendous amount of tum'ah, of impurity. And when one sinks into Avodah Zarah, it removes him completely from Avodat Hashem, from the service of Hashem, almost immediately. Almost immediately, because it has so much tum'ah, it has the power to remove him almost instantly, on the spot. That is why the rabbis tell us, Kol ha'oved Avodah Zarah kilu kofer b'chol ha'Torah kula. Whoever worships idols, even though he does everything else, he puts on tefillin, he prays, he gives tzedakah. It's as though he denies the entire Torah. Because Avodah Zarah removes one instantly away from the Torah. Not in a couple of years, immediately. Because it's so serious, it is as though he is already transgressing the entire Torah. Another idea of why Saru Maher, how were they able to move away so quickly? I saw another explanation, and that is that they were depressed. Am Yisrael saw the Aron of Moshe floating in the air. They thought that he had passed away, and they sank into depression. And the rabbis explain that even though depression in itself is not a sin, depression more than anything else leads a person to commit sins. Whereas one's emunah could weaken over several years, if one becomes depressed, he can let go of everything overnight. That is why there are some individuals who after the Holocaust dropped everything just like that. Some of them, or I should say many of them, they had very weak roots to begin with. And this was a terrible storm that knocked them off their feet. But there were some, and I just recently heard the story. It was incredible, of one who was a big tzaddik, a young man who was a big tzaddik, was careful in everything. And because of what he witnessed, he dropped everything, and I think he went to become a priest. These people are still looking for him to see where he went after the war. How could it be? This was a very religious man. We understand those who were not so religious to begin with, those who had weak roots, those who were always weak. So over time, they dropped everything. But to just let go of everything, to fall from the top to the bottom, just like that, if somebody is depressed, depression, this could happen. If somebody goes through some shocking experience, this can happen to him. That's why the rabbis tell us be very, very careful with depression. Depression is very, very dangerous. Yes?
Why was Shevet Levi high in the Dragon not fall into that? Because they were learning Torah in Egypt? Or what?
Yeah, Shevet Levi was more attached to the Torah, and therefore they were more protected. Sure. Alright, we spoke about Avodah Zarah of the golden calf. And you might think, well, that's something from the past. Today we don't have it. Well, today we have it too. Today there's also Avodah Zarah, because what's the common denominator of all idols? If there's anything out there that someone worships, admires much more than Hashem, that is Avodah Zarah. Money, therefore, today is like Avodah Zarah. Materialism. People worship it. They're willing to do anything for it. To work many, many hours al-hashbon ma, on hashbon of perhaps a shiur of Torah, perhaps going to pray in minyan, because they want to make a few more dollars. That could be considered Avodah Zarah. In other words, that's more important to you than the Torah, than the tefillah, because that's what the person is saying. That's his statement. I'm going to spend more time trying to make more money, and I'm not going to learn as much Torah, Khalila. Imagine a real estate broker who can make 6% on a mansion in Truesdale Estates or in Bel Air. He's selling for $25 million, but he has to sign the deal on Shabbat. It's very tempting. You know what he might do? Well, I remember learning in yeshiva that if I use my left hand, it's okay. Yeah. There was once an individual who came to the rabbi, Rabbi, can you give me a heter for smoking on Shabbat? I just can't get rid of this habit. The rabbi says, of course. Smoke it the other way around. Put the burning side in your mouth. You're making it through a shinui. Obviously, he was joking. Right, but that's the way the Yetzer Hara speaks to us. Tries to find out what's this 6% on $25 million. How could you have to sign the contract on Shabbat, otherwise you lose the deal. What are you going to do? I'd like to tempt you.
For sure.
What would you do? Like Zalman just said, if you have true bitachon, you know that if it's basher, if you're supposed to make the money, you would get it without doing a Hilul Shabbat. If it's not meant for you, no matter what you do, you're not going to get it. Hashem is testing you. We're always tested. And it's not easy. 6% on 25 million?
Even 1%.
Even 1%, well, yeah. 3% on Sunday, yeah, I'll take it. Yeah. Yes?
Why, in that context, why did the rabbis daven that the Jews should be Yetzer for Avodah Zarah?
Right, that's a good question. After the rebuilding of the second temple, rabbis prayed to be mevatel the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah, of idol worshipping, because it was something very difficult. It is as a result of that the destruction of the first temple occurred. So they begged Hashem, we have enough Yetzarim, get rid of this one. And Hashem, of course, agreed. And that is why today we don't have that Yetzer for those Avodah Zarah from back then, but there's still Avodah Zarah. In some ways, people still worship certain idols in today's world.
Is the real reason for the Gemuli Ariyot, is that?
Yeah.
That really?
That is what I said before. That subconsciously, what is the driving force behind Avodah Zarah is to use Avodah Zarah as a front, because deep down, everybody wants a life of metiranut, of efkerut, of prostitution, of being able to do immoral things. That is the driving force, and everything else is just a front. But anyway, what is happening today? Not only is there an emphasis on materialism, what you see in many countries is a adifut. People have a preference to have a dog instead of a child, right? You've heard of that? You've seen that? Why? For a similar reason. There is a tremendous emphasis on oneself, on not having responsibilities. And a dog doesn't complain. A dog doesn't need diapers, right? There's less work to do. So this is the same idea, getting away from responsibilities. That is all part of Avodah Zarah. Alright, up until now we spoke about the fact that Avodah Zarah is so serious because it turns away a Jew very quickly from Hashem. Because of that, Hashem says, you know what, I have to cure them. Hashem gives us mitzvah of Shabbat. Shabbat is the greatest cure for Avodah Zarah. Because in the same way that Avodah Zarah turns one away immediately from Hashem, Shabbat brings one very, very quickly back to Hashem. And that is what the Rabbi said, Kol ha-shomer Shabbat, whoever keeps Shabbat, Kol ha-mekayem Shabbat, Kilu mekayem et kol ha-Torah kula. It is as though he's keeping the entire Torah. How come? Because even if somebody is an idol worshiper and he keeps Shabbat, the Shabbat is so powerful it will bring him back to his senses. And Hashem says, Ani mochelo, I will forgive him on the Avodah Zarah. Hashem says, I know he will come back. Why? Because Shabbat is a contradiction to Avodah Zarah. When a person keeps Shabbat, when a Jew keeps Shabbat, he is testifying that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. Right? So it's a complete contradiction of anything else he's doing. So that statement that he makes by observing the Shabbat, by making the Kiddush, is so powerful, it will eventually bring him back. And that is why Baalei Teshuvah, those who are coming back to the roots, are encouraged to commit themselves as soon as possible to Shabbat. Because whoever will start keeping Shabbat will eventually keep all the mitzvot. Another reason why Shabbat is powerful, because what is written on Shabbat? Vayin nafash, right? Shabbat vayin nafash. What's vayin nafash? And he rested. Why doesn't it say the word menucha, venach? What's vayin nafash? Vayin nafash means that the nefesh, the nefesh habehemi, the animal spirit in the human being is finally, Baruch Hashem, resting one day a week. Once the body is put to rest, guess what happens? The neshama is able to think freely and it can easily express itself. It does not have that chance the whole week. It's caged into this body that is working so hard. All it's thinking of is food and money and other things, right? All of a sudden, Shabbat, vayin nafash, the neshama is finally able to express itself and to reconnect itself with Hashem. That is why Shabbat is powerful. Because Shabbat is so powerful, whoever drops Shabbat quickly moves away too from Judaism. And this is exactly what happened to Jews who came to this country at the early part of the 20th century. Many of them had to work 6 days a week. Until Eisenhower, there was no long weekend. And because they were forced to work on Shabbat, they could have become independent. Like many Syrian Jews, they became peddlers. If I can't work on Shabbat, I'm going to work for myself. In other words, they were forcing them to work on Shabbat. Many of them, of course, did not accept. Those who unfortunately went along and worked on Shabbat, as soon as they dropped Shabbat, very soon after that they dropped the tefillin, they dropped everything else, and their children almost all assimilated. Anybody who kept Shabbat back then, I can almost assure you that his grandchildren are still Jewish today. That is how powerful the Shabbat is. Whoever dropped the Shabbat probably dropped everything. And there was a recent article in Israel about a whole group of Israelis that had a dance around the golden calf. And there were some Jews that protested. What are you guys doing? This is ridiculous. Yeah, recently.
About the golden calf?
They made a golden calf, and they had a whole dance, a whole party in Eilat. And there were some Jews that protested. And you know what they were told? What's the big deal? You don't keep Shabbat anyway. In other words, if you don't keep Shabbat, it's okay to do this. Why are you protesting about this if you don't keep Shabbat? You realize what they're saying here? In other words, if you drop Shabbat, then everything is okay. Halila.
What was the intention of this party?
It was an ecstasy party, exactly. Anyway, the Chafetz Chaim explains why, if somebody drops Shabbat, he's dropping everything. Shabbat is called an ot. Ki ot hi beni uven bnei Israel. It's a sign. And imagine you're going to your favorite hardware store to buy some nails or whatever, and you see the door is locked. What are you going to think? Well, maybe the owner went on vacation, but he's going to come back. What happens if you come back 3 weeks later and you see that he removed the sign? Then you probably know that he went out of business or he moved away. So the Chafetz Chaim says, when a Jew stops keeping a mitzvah, does an averah, whatever it might be, then you figure, you know what, maybe one day he's going to do teshuvah, he's going to come back. He succumbed to his yetzer. But as soon as the Jew removes the Shabbat, he's saying, I'm no longer Jewish. He's removing the sign. I'm out of business. I've closed the shop. Halila. That is the statement that a Jew makes, Halila, when he removes the sign called Shabbat. I just want to cover in the next few minutes another part of this parasha, where Moshe asks Hashem two very important questions. One, Hodi'eni na derachecha, I'd like to understand your ways. Madua tzadik veralo rasha v'tovlo. Why does it occur sometimes that the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper? Please give me an explanation. After all, I'm concerned. Moshe is not curious. He's concerned that in the future, those who will be far removed from Matan Torah will have this question and they will have no answer and they will be confused and perhaps there will be a Hilul Hashem. Why are you letting Geshaim get away with it? When in the Torah you said, if you follow my statutes, you will prosper, and if you don't, you will have it difficult. And here we see a lot of people who are prospering, they're not following your statutes. So Moshe is trying to understand, to get an explanation from Hashem, let me know your midot, let me know how you do things and why you do things. And he asks him, show me your essence. I'd like to understand what you are all about. What is Hashem? On the second question, Hashem says, it is not possible for you as a human being while you're alive to understand or to grasp me or to see any part of me. In other words, forget about that. Nevertheless, he tells him, I'll let you see my back and not my front. I'm not going to get into all the commentaries of what they say about this pasuk, but there's one idea that the Hatam Sofer says about what does it mean that Hashem says, I will let you see my back and not my front. Hashem is telling Moshe, it will be very difficult for you to see and to understand things as they happen. It is only years later, after you're able to look back at something that you will be able to piece everything together and understand why it needed to happen. We can never fully understand things as they're happening, or before they happen. If we understand at all, it is only afterwards. You may be able to understand my actions only after they have occurred. Oh, now I see why this needed to happen. Now I see why this took so long to happen. After it happens, you're able to see things that make more sense. Also, Hashem tells him, even though you cannot see me, even though you cannot fully understand me, ani avir kol tuvi al panecha. So the commentaries explain that what that means is Hashem does only good for us. And therefore, we should all get into the habit of saying gamzu letova. Even though we don't fully understand it, it must be for the good, because Hashem only does good. That is what you can infer from the words that ani avir, kol tuvi. The second point that he says is v'sakoti chapi alecha adovri, and I will cover you up, I will protect you. What that means is that even though we as human beings are sometimes challenged and we go through difficult times, Hashem says, v'sakoti chapi alecha, I will always give you the strength, litmoded, to be able to withstand these challenging times. Hashem does not put anybody through a difficult time without giving him the ability, the strength, to be able to go through it. Hashem protects us. In other words, even though we don't understand why things happen, we need to remember at all times that it happens for a reason, it's for a good reason, and Hashem gives us the strength to be able to deal with it. He does not challenge us in a way that we would not be able to pass the test, that we would not be able to withstand the challenge. Just want to finish up with a very, very important point. Actually, 2 points. One is that you may wonder what explains some people having a stronger emunah in Hashem and some having a weaker emunah. Even though I've explained a little bit about what the driving force of Avodah Zarah is, there's also something else. There's something called Ruach Elokim and Ruach Shtut. In this week's parasha, we are told that Betzalel was filled with Ruach Elokim, with the Spirit of Hashem, and that is how he was able to construct the Mishkan. There's also something called Ruach Shtut, a spirit of folly, that the rabbis tell us, En Adam over Avera, Ad shenichnas bo Ruach Shtut, until a spirit of folly enters him. What's the difference? Here somebody's getting a Ruach Elokim, and here somebody's getting a Ruach Shtut. It all depends how you prepare yourself. If one's main aspiration in life is to do the will of Hashem, that Hashem, I want to know what you want of me, then Hashem will give him the Ruach Elokim, and therefore he will know to do the right things, and he will avoid trouble. If one does not ask Hashem to help him, if one does not care to do the will of Hashem, and instead he listens to what the radio has to say, and he reads the newspapers, he watches TV, his head will absorb ruach shel shtuyot, nonsense, folly. That's what his mind is going to absorb. And he will not necessarily do the right things. Not only will he not necessarily do the right things, unfortunately, ruach shtut would lead him to commit averot. Because how does a ruach shtut work? A ruach shtut is, like we said before, is a form of a yetzer hara that tells him, this is interesting, this is good, try it out. Anytime a person values the benefit of the moment, anytime a person values a ta'ava, a desire much more than the will of Hashem, he must be a shoteh, he must be stupid. This is folly. How could you give up olam haba for the benefit, for the enjoyment of 1 minute of doing something which is against the Torah? After all, many of those enjoyments that are forbidden, how long do they last? A minute? Are you willing to let go of your olam haba? Are you willing to go against Hashem's will for this shtuyot, for this avirah, how much pleasure are you going to already have? It's only because you are shoteh, you are a fool. And why are you a fool? Because you've been listening to shtuyot. You've been allowing your mind to be bombarded by shtuyot. A person, therefore, who spends more time learning Torah, as you mentioned before, like Shevet Levi, attached to a community, going to minyanim, learning Torah continuously, hopefully he will be absorbing the Ruach Elokim. He will have the Da'at Torah, the proper hashkafa, the proper outlook. And hopefully he will do the right things. And last but not least, there's a big topic that nobody is aware of. Most people are not aware of that exists in Parashat Tisa, and that is what happened to the children of Moshe. What happened to the children of Moshe? Hashem promises Moshe, I will make a whole nation out of you. And during the first temple era, towards the end, Hashem took the children of Moshe and placed them over the other side of the river Sambatyon. They are there still till today. And this is a whole lecture in itself that I've spoken about in the past. very, very soon we will see them, because they will be replacing the government in Israel. As the Pasuk says, Ve'alu Mosheim behar Tzion lishpot et har Esav. Who are these Mosheim? The children of Moshe who are still on the other side of the Sambatyon River, a river that throws stones 6 days a week and rests right before Shabbat. It's a river that we know has been around. Today Hashem obviously does not want us to discover where it is, even with all the satellites. We know for a fact that it exists. On the other side of this river are the children of Moshe, who are all tzaddikim v'kedoshim. And soon they're all going to join us. This is a nation that Hashem created just from Moshe, as He promised him. Hashem says, I will not abandon the Jews, but from you, I will make a new nation. It's not exactly a new nation, but it's a separate group of people. Alright, chapter 34 in Parashat Tisa, Pasuk Yud, Vayomer Ineh Anochi Koret Brit Neged Kol Amecha E'esen Niflaot Asher Lo Nivreu B'chol Haaretz B'chol Hagoyim V'ra'a Kol Ha'am Asher Ata B'kirbo Et Ma'aseh Adonai Ki Norahu Asher Ani Oseh Imach. In other words, this group, these children of Moshe, will be a very, very unique group that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will remove from Am Yisrael and keep them apart so that they can retain their righteousness. And that is why till today they are tzaddikim. There are many stories about them, many stories about the river Sambat.